Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is October 27th, 2025. Welcome to the podcast. As promised, I wanted to talk strategy this week about the Ukraine and Russia war and kind of contrast the difference from what I talked about last week, which led to the ceasefire in Israel and Hamas. Something up front that I want to say is the mainstream media does not talk about how this war was potentially lost for Ukraine in 2014. Right? So, as everybody will remember, this started for the Ukraine and Russia back in March of 2014 when they took Crimea. So we know that, and we remember that the world said that the Russians were evil and all that stuff, and all of that stuff is right. But let's look at some details that maybe you didn't know that only I've talked about. So, in case you missed one of my podcasts about this subject, there was a separatist movement in the Donbas region. That's spelled Donbas region. So if you Google that, it'll show you the map. And if you look at that map, you can see what the Russian strategy has been, because that is the eastern part of Russia, the Ukraine. Now, if you will remember, I said that when President Zelensky got elected, the eastern part of Ukraine didn't even vote for it. So you got that detail from me. All right. So the modern separatist movement in Ukraine escalated significantly in early 2014 following the Euromaidan revolution. So if you're interested in that, then you can look up that one. So the separatists, with Russian support, occupied government buildings in eastern Ukraine, and an armed conflict began in April 2014 between Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian government forces in the Donbas region. Now, apparently, after that, we have a couple of years that go by, and then the Russians finally send in troops for that, right? So, just to kind of hone in on it, early March 2014, pro-Russian activists, some direct about Russia-occupied government buildings, like I said, in Donetsk and Luhansk. I'm probably butchering those names. April, these protests escalated into armed conflict, marking the start of the separatist insurgency in the Donbas region. So that is important for us to know, that you probably didn't know unless you listened to the podcast, right? Okay, so let's look at what the strategy is of the Ukraine. Okay, so their strategy is mobile defense supported by extensive fortifications to counter Russian advances and inflict heavy losses on occupying forces. Okay, all right. Now, once I get through another one of these, I'm going to explain why I'm telling you this. Okay, so they have selective offensive actions, attrition. A core component of strategy is to attrit Russian forces through heavy artillery fire and other means. Okay, and then the drone attacks. You've heard of the drone attacks because the U.S. has given the Ukrainians the drones so that they could use it. All right. And then the last one, or one that I want to talk about, strategic importance. Striking distant targets like fuel processing plants and oil pipelines is intended to starve the Russian war machine of resources. Now, as far as I know, if you watch the news, most of those were going into Russia. The missiles that they were talking about to hit targets and also the drones, etc. Okay, the U.S. strategy. So, and this is current. We impose new sanctions on Russia in an attempt to push Putin to stop his nearly 4-year war in Ukraine. All right. The sanctions target two of Russia's largest oil companies and their subsidiaries, and they're hoping that that will be a significant blow to the Russian economy. Now, the strategy also is President Trump is calling for a freeze of the conflict along the current battle lines, which is a ceasefire proposal that is backed by Ukraine. Now, I've talked about the strategy of both, not as detailed as Israel and Hamas use, because they achieved their objective. Now, if we look at Ukraine's strategy, their strategy is to bomb and drone attack Russia. So it begs the question, in that Donbas region, they are actually have their ground forces there, some of them. And the reason that they are doing that is because the Russians are actually trying to move inward. And so far, the Ukrainians have stopped them. The military ground forces of Ukraine, not that big, and they don't seem to have the knowledge base and the specialized forces that the Israelis had to fight a ground war to take back the cities. And the reason that I say that is because what they've done has been very limited to push into eastern Ukraine to repel the Russians and the separatists. Because remember, there's two groups. There's the separatists, and then there's the Russian-backed forces. And that's something that doesn't really make the news. I think I'm the only one who's repeatedly talked about how the separatist movement seemed to have helped the Russians occupy these areas pretty easily. And when they took Crimea, that triggered all of what's happened to present day. And if you look at it from a strategy, why didn't the Ukrainians try to take back Crimea? Why aren't they trying to right now? That strategy would have helped them to have a base of operations so that they could go further east, as opposed to what the Israelis did in Gaza. They pushed through with their ground troops, and they actually took control of it, and they took control of the air as well. And that's really a military strategy So what I'm really getting at is the strategy that the Ukraine is using is confusing to me because they're currently asking for missiles so that they can attack Russia when actually, and this is opinion, why aren't they going into eastern Ukraine with most of their military and repelling the Russians? That would seem to be a better strategy if you're looking for a ceasefire. And currently, the president is recommending that they want to freeze ceasefire with where the land is right now. Why? Because they're worried that the next time that the Russians surge out of the eastern and start heading towards the Kiev area, that they're going to take more land. The longer this war goes on, the strategy that the Ukrainians are using does not seem to be effective, because in order for them to use their strategy against Russia, they would have to hit St. Petersburg, and I don't think that any of the other countries are going to give the Ukraine those types of missiles, because they are afraid that that could set off and maybe even start another world war if they would do that. So, in contrast to what Israel did or has done, you have to occupy the land that is at issue. And like I previously told you, some of this is some very valuable natural resources, very valuable. And the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast area, that's spelled Dnipropetrovsk, and then second word is Oblast, Oblast. Now, this is a Russian word, and so I spelled it because I didn't want to butcher how it is pronounced. That is where I believe that the Russians, based on my analysis, that's where they want to push into next. Why? Because it's got the second highest GDP in the country. They're very productive. And in case you didn't know, Kiev, the capital, is the wealthiest city in the country of the Ukraine. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I just wanted to focus on military strategy, which actually wins wars, as opposed to negotiations. You cannot negotiate unless you have, meaning the country has the upper hand, and you force your adversary, no matter what you think of them. Words alone can't do that. You can call the Russians the bad guys, you can call them devils, and all of that stuff. That won't win it for you. What will win it for you if you take back the eastern Ukraine and Crimea with ground forces, a dedication to getting the land back, and then you negotiate. This is Just Listen, hosted by George. Like I said, look at that Donbass region, that's Donbas region, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There's plenty of images showing exactly what that region is and what it has. Have a great day, and goodbye.